On the morning of August 22nd, Forest Ranger Daniel Marsh stepped out of his truck at the North Valley trailhead and stopped. A black bear was standing at the edge of the trees, not feeding, not startled, not moving at all, just standing there, looking directly at him. Daniel had been a ranger for 11 years. He knew bears. He had never seen one do this. He didn't know it yet, but that bear had been waiting for him, and what it was trying to warn him about was already burning beneath the forest floor. 200 acres of protected old-growth pine, with dry August wind coming in nowhere for the fire to go but up. He had driven his truck to the trailhead at 6:45, the same time he arrived most mornings. The fog was still thick enough that his headlights caught it and turned it orange. He parked at the small gravel lot and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening. It was the smoke he noticed first. Not fire. He would have known that smell would have been out of the truck and on the radio in seconds. This was different, older somehow, as if the smoke had been there long enough to become part of the air. He noted it. He filed it away. He got out, laced his boots, clipped his radio to his belt. He took 4 steps toward the trailhead before he stopped. The bear was at the tree line, not moving, not doing what a bear does when you surprise it, the quick assessment, the decision to flee or posture. It was standing at the edge of the forest, its body half in shadow and half in morning light, looking in the direction of the parking lot. Looking, it seemed to Daniel, directly at him. He stood still. He knew better than to run, better than to make sudden movements. He had encountered black bears many times in 11 years, at streams, in berry patches, once memorably on a trail with 2 cubs behind her. He had a vocabulary for bears built from years of careful observation. This bear's posture fit none of those categories. It was simply still, the way a tree is still, the way the valley itself was still on certain mornings when the wind stopped and the whole landscape seemed to hold a single long breath. Daniel stood in the gravel lot, and the bear stood at the edge of the trees, and the smoke hung in the air between them. Neither of them moved for what he would later estimate was 4 minutes. Then the bear turned, slowly, and walked back into the forest. Not running, not startled, simply done. Daniel stood for another minute. Then he took out his radio and called in what he had seen. He started down the trail. Behind him, the smoke did not lift. Even as the sun rose and the fog began to burn off in the clearing, the smoke remained, low, still, settled into the air like something that had decided to stay. He walked north along the eastern edge of the valley, following the creek. The smoke was with him the whole way. At a point about 1.5 miles in, he stopped. He had seen smoke like this once before. Not in this valley. Further south, 3 years ago, when a smoldering root fire had burned underground for weeks before anyone noticed. Those fires were the dangerous kind. They moved slowly, invisibly, through the deep layers of dried organic material beneath the soil. They could travel hundreds of feet without showing a flame, emerging later in a completely different location. By the time you saw smoke, the fire had often already gone somewhere you hadn't expected. Root fires were rare in this district, but the summer had been exceptionally dry. August had brought almost no rain. The creek was running at a fraction of its usual volume. He crouched and pressed his palm flat against the soil at the edge of the trail. He held it there, then longer. The soil was warm, not hot, but warmer than it should have been. The kind of warmth that came from below, not above. The sun hadn't reached this section of trail yet. He stood up. He looked at the forest around him. The trees looked normal. No visible smoke source, no column rising from the ground. Just the ambient haze in the air and the warmth under his palm. He took out his radio. "Base, this is Marsh. I'm getting warm soil at 1.5 miles on the northeast trail. Still picking up ambient smoke." I want to request a thermal drone flight over the valley floor. The thermal drone arrived that afternoon. The imagery came back within an hour of the flight, and the district supervisor, who had been skeptical about authorizing the flight for what was formally logged as warm soil and ambient smoke, looked at the data and went quiet. The underground fire extended across an area of approximately 230 acres. It was burning in the deep organic layer, the compressed centuries of dead plant material that sits beneath the mineral soil of an old-growth forest. This layer, sometimes called duff, could be a meter or more thick in undisturbed old-growth stands. When it dried out sufficiently and found an ignition source, a forgotten campfire, a lightning strike that appeared to self-extinguish, a smoldering root, it could burn for weeks or months without producing any surface evidence beyond the faint haze that Daniel had noticed. The fire history records the dispatcher had pulled confirmed what Daniel had suspected at the trail. The valley had burned 47 years ago, a fire that the current forest had grown up over, leaving the deep duff layer of the original forest partially intact beneath the regrowth. That layer was what was burning now. The suppression operation took 11 days. Crews worked with hand tools and targeted water application. Surface firefighting methods were useless because there was no surface fire. They dug trenches to the mineral soil layer, cutting off the underground fire's fuel supply section by section, working around the perimeter of the thermal map and moving inward. It was slow, careful, invisible work. The kind of firefighting that happens below the ground, unreported, while the forest above it stands undisturbed. On the 5th day of operations, a fire behavior analyst walked the perimeter with Daniel and pointed to the section of trail where he had found the warm soil. If this had gone another 3 or 4 days without detection, she said, it would have reached the surface in this section here. She pointed to a stand of old-growth pines to the north, trees that were 60, 80 years old, the largest and oldest in the valley. With the wind patterns we've had this week, once it surfaced, it would have moved fast. We might have contained it. We might not have. Daniel looked at the trees. He thought about the bear, about the way it had stood not at the edge of the fire, not in the section of valley above the burning duff, where the heat and the gases might have been detectable at the surface. It had stood at the trailhead, at the point where a ranger was certain to arrive. There was no way to know what the bear had perceived, whether it was the heat rising through the soil, detectable to an animal that spent most of its life on the ground, whether it was the gases, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, the other compounds that smoldering organic material produces, rising slowly through the duff layer and the mineral soil above, too dilute by the surface to be measurable but perhaps not too dilute for a bear's nose. Whether it was something else entirely. What Daniel could say and did say in the after-action report was what he had observed. A bear, standing where it could not be missed, on the morning the underground fire was first detected. Standing there as if it had been waiting for someone to arrive and pay attention. The report was factual. It documented the sighting, the time, the duration, the animal's behavior. It did not speculate about the bear's awareness or intention. That was not what after-action reports were for. The notation he added at the bottom was unofficial. Worth further study he wrote. The behavior was unlike any bear encounter in 11 years of this district. The timing, given subsequent findings, is significant. The fire was declared fully contained on the 11th day. The crews came out. The equipment was hauled back down the forest road. The district supervisor filed the final report with the state forestry office. The valley looked unchanged. That was the nature of this kind of fire. It had never broken the surface, never produced the images that wildfires produce, never generated the drama that draws attention to these events. The trees were still standing. The creek was still running. The trail still ran north along its eastern edge, past the warm soil that was now cool again, past the section of old-growth pine that had come within days of the surface ignition that would have changed everything. Daniel Marsh drove the trailhead road the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the morning he had found the bear. He parked in the same gravel lot, got out of the truck, and stood in the clear morning air. The smoke was gone. The fog lifted earlier than usual, and by 7 o'clock the valley was fully lit and warm with early autumn sun. He walked the trail north. He didn't stop until he reached the section where he had pressed his palm to the ground and felt the warmth beneath it. He crouched in the same position, pressed his palm to the same soil. Cool. Normal. The Earth's ordinary temperature for a mountain morning in late August. He stood up and looked at the old-growth pines. He saw a bear twice more that autumn, once at the creek, once at the far edge of the clearing near the trailhead. Both times it behaved like a normal bear, aware of him, moving away, conducting its business in the unhurried way of an animal that knows it belongs here. He could not know if either of these bears was the animal from August 22nd. There was no way to know. He reported the sightings as he always did, in the weekly wildlife log. He noted the location, the time, the animal's behavior. On the August 22nd report, the one he had revised 3 times since the fire suppression ended, he had eventually settled on language that was as accurate as he could make it. Animal appeared to be waiting at trailhead. Did not exhibit feeding, flight, or defensive behavior. Maintained position for approximately 4 minutes before retreating into forest. Smoke noted at same time as bear observation. Warm soil detected later that morning on same trail route. Underground fire subsequently confirmed across 230-acre area. Relationship between bear's behavior and fire event. Unknown, but documented. That last phrase, unknown but documented, was the one he had thought about the longest. He was a practical man who worked in a discipline that valued careful observation above speculation. He had been trained to record what he saw and to leave interpretation to those with the data and the credentials to interpret it. What he had seen was a bear, standing still in the morning smoke, looking at him. He had stopped. He had looked back. He had gone down the trail. The valley was still standing. That was the part he did not write in any report. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was the kind of truth that didn't fit in a form. The kind that lived, instead, in the specific memory of a Tuesday morning in August. The gravel lot, the pale smoke, the bear's eyes, and that stayed there whole and clear long after the paperwork was filed.